The declaration arrived on every screen on Earth at 0347 GMT and lasted exactly 14 seconds. The creature who delivered it stood 4 meters tall, its four silver-gray arms motionless at its sides, its white eyes reflecting nothing. Behind it stretched a throne room large enough to swallow a city block, and behind that, through a viewport the size of a stadium, the curve of a star system that was not ours. Humanity, it said, and the word vibrated in the sternum of every person on the planet simultaneously. You have been selected. My court requires entertainment. Your civilization will be dissolved in 30 of your days. Prepare whatever you wish. It will not matter. The transmission ended. Emperor Xyrax of the Velthari, ruler of 19 star systems, conqueror of 43 civilizations, 260 years on the throne, had already turned away before the feed cut out, already thinking about something else. Colonel Mara Calloway watched the replay for the sixth time in the briefing room of Helios Array and said nothing for a very long time. He's bored, she said finally. Lieutenant Reed Crane looked up from his console. Ma'am? He didn't come here to conquer us. He's not here for resources or territory. Calloway pressed two fingers against her temple, eyes still on the frozen image of Xyrax's turned back. He declared war on an entire civilization because his court needed something to watch. He picked us the way you'd pick a channel. She lowered her hand. That is the most dangerous thing I've ever heard. Crane said nothing. He had served under Calloway for 4 years, through the Kepler perimeter incidents and the Iron Shore colony evacuation, and he had learned that her silences meant she was building something. He waited. Pull everything we have on Velthari gravity weapons, she said. Not the theoretical models, the actual debris fields from every engagement on record. That's 3 incidents total, Crane said. Proxima Station, the Keth colony observation, and the ash pool engagement. I know how many incidents there are, Lieutenant. Pull them. He pulled them. Calloway read through the night. The debris fields told her something the models had buried in footnotes. Every gravity collapse was a perfect sphere, 40 kilometers in diameter, always exactly 40, not 39, not 41, always the same, which meant the weapons had a fixed minimum safe operating range, a distance inside which the collapse affected the firing vessel as well as the target. The Velthari had never needed to address this limitation because no enemy had ever been willing to cross it. Why would they? You don't run toward the weapon that ends worlds, unless running toward it was the only way to survive it. The blind spot was proximity. The problem was getting close enough to use it. She called the fleet commanders together at 0600, 41 vessels. The largest was the UEF Resolute at 900 meters, roughly 1/4 the length of the Sovereign Wrath. She looked at the assembled faces on the tactical display and laid out the shape of the approach without stating the mathematics directly, because she had found over 20 years of command that people accepted hard truths better when they arrived at them independently. Captain Marcus Shaw arrived at it first. He commanded the last signal, a destroyer with a crew of 218, and he was quiet for a long moment after the numbers resolved on his display. Shaw was 43 years old. His son was 9, enrolled at the Covenant Station Academy. He had a photograph of the boy on his console that Calloway had seen 100 times without ever mentioning. You're describing a charge, Shaw said. I'm describing an approach vector, Calloway said. Inside their targeting window, at those closing speeds, the ships at the front of the formation. I know what the casualties look like, Marcus. He held her gaze. How many ships? If the timing holds, between 12 and 16 on the approach, the remaining ships reach the blind spot intact. And if the timing doesn't hold, then we lose the same way everyone else lost, faster. Silence settled across the briefing room. Outside the Helios Array's viewports, Earth turned slowly in the dark, a blue-white curve against the void, indifferent to the conversation happening above it. What happens when we're inside the blind spot? Asked Commander Elena Ashford from the Dawnbreaker, her voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone doing mathematics in real time. Conventional weapons at close range, Calloway said. Their hull plating is optimized for energy weapons at distance. The metallurgical analysis from the Proxima debris suggests that at under 40 kilometers, it's not especially remarkable. She paused. They have never needed to develop close-quarters combat doctrine. You don't develop doctrine for situations you have never encountered. We're betting everything on them not having a solution to a problem they've never had, Shaw said. We're betting everything on them being exactly as arrogant as that declaration suggested. Calloway looked at the frozen image of Xyrax's turned back on the secondary display. He picked us for entertainment. He did not pick us because we were dangerous. He came here expecting a performance. Her voice dropped slightly. We are going to give him one he didn't prepare for. She gave them 2 hours. Every commander returned. The Velthari arrived on day 27, 3 days early, a demonstration that the schedule was theirs to keep or break as they chose. The sovereign wrath dropped from faster-than-light travel at the heliopause, like a mountain falling from the sky. 4 kilometers of silver-gray hull catching the light of a sun it had no business being near, and behind it came the escort fleet, 7 vessels, each larger than the UEF Resolute, and behind them a carrier that appeared in no intelligence file. Calloway's tactical team spent 40 minutes trying to classify it before she told them to stop. It didn't matter what the carrier held. The plan didn't change. Emperor Zyrax transmitted within the hour. His voice carried warmth, the genuine pleasure of a collector examining something new. Colonel Calloway, we have observed your fleet's positioning. The formations are creative. A pause that contains something like amusement. We expected more ships. Calloway unmuted. We have what we have. 41 vessels. Against our complement, the warmth deepened. You understand the mathematics of this engagement. I understand them. And yet you remain. We remain, Calloway said. A longer pause. When Zyrax spoke again, something had shifted. A faint sharpening, the first genuine attention she had heard from him underneath the performance of interest. You are not afraid, Colonel. We're terrified, Calloway said. That's different from being stopped by it. Silence. Then, almost to himself, interesting. We've already begun, Calloway said, and cut the channel. If this story has you hooked, subscribe now and hit the bell. Now back to it. The human fleet moved, not in formation. That was the first thing the Velthari tactical officers registered, and it confused them for 11 seconds, which was exactly long enough. 41 human ships accelerating at maximum thrust directly toward the Velthari fleet, spreading as they moved into a pattern that existed in no engagement database because it wasn't a military pattern. It was a net. It only worked if you were willing to be inside the gravity well when it collapsed. If you had done the mathematics on acceptable loss and found them unacceptable but necessary. If you were the kind of species that had spent 50,000 years learning how to kill things larger and stronger than itself and had developed, across that time, a very particular relationship with the difference between surviving an engagement and winning one. The sovereign wrath fired. 4 gravity wells collapsed simultaneously. Perfect spheres, 40 kilometers in diameter, and they destroyed 11 human ships instantly and crippled 6 more. And Calloway watched the names disappear from the tactical display. The last signal gone in the first volley, the threshold and gray vigil in the second, 8 others across 30 seconds of engagement, and she kept her eyes open, because closing them would have been a dishonesty the moment didn't deserve. The net closed anyway. The remaining ships were still moving. The gap was still closing. At 37 kilometers, 3 inside the minimum safe range, Commander Elena Ashford brought the Dawnbreaker alongside the Sovereign Wrath's port flank and opened fire with every conventional weapon on board. The Velthari hull plating absorbed the first volley and cracked on the second and failed on the third, not because the weapons were powerful by galactic standards, but because at 37 kilometers, power was no longer the relevant variable. Proximity was. The Velthari escort vessels broke formation. This was the moment the entire plan had been built toward. Not the damage to the Sovereign Wrath, not the approach itself, but this. 2 seconds of tactical uncertainty from a fleet that had absorbed 43 civilizations and had never once needed to develop a doctrine for enemies who ran toward the weapons instead of away from them. 2 seconds in which 23 surviving human ships were inside the escort vessel's minimum safe range as well, and the engagement became something the Velthari had no framework to process. What followed lasted 14 minutes. It was close and brutal and deeply unelegant, and when it ended, 5 Velthari escort vessels were destroyed and 2 had fled to faster than light, and the Sovereign Wrath was listing hard to port, its forward section gone, its drives offline, atmosphere venting from 22 hull breaches. Calloway requested communication. The silence stretched long enough that Crane glanced at her once. She shook her head. When Zyrax spoke, his voice had changed completely. The warmth was gone. The performance was gone. What remained was something quieter and more careful. The voice of a being in the process of revising a fundamental assumption. Colonel Calloway, you accepted those losses in advance. Yes. You calculated them before the engagement began and proceeded anyway. Yes. A pause. Why? Calloway looked at the tactical display, at the 17 names that were no longer there. Because the alternative was losing everything, she said, and because the people on those ships understood the mathematics and flew into formation anyway. Not because they weren't afraid, because they decided that what they were protecting was worth the cost of protecting it. She paused. You came here for entertainment, Emperor. I want to be honest with you. We are not entertainment. We are what you get when a species spends 50,000 years at war with itself and everything it encounters and refuses, generation after generation, to stop getting better at it. You picked us because we seemed manageable. I understand why. 43 civilizations is a reasonable sample size for an assumption. Her voice was steady. The assumption was wrong. The silence that followed was the longest yet. "No one has ever charged us," Zyrax said finally, and there was something in his voice that Calloway still couldn't name. Not defeat, not respect exactly, but the specific quality of attention that occurs in a very intelligent being when reality fails to match its model of itself. In 260 years of engagements, not one civilization. "The others tried to survive," Calloway said. "We tried to win. There's a difference." Another silence. When he spoke again, his voice carried something new. Not warmth, but weight. "What do you want, Colonel Calloway?" "Leave our system," she said. "Don't come back. And when you return to your court, tell them what happened here. Tell them exactly what it cost you, and what it cost us. And let them draw their own conclusions about whether humanity is the kind of variable worth introducing into future calculations." A very long pause. "And if we return? Then we'll do this again," Calloway said, "and we'll be better at it than we were today." The Sovereign Wrath began its realignment 4 hours later, moving on maneuvering thrusters toward the heliopause, dragging wreckage behind it. Calloway watched it go on the long-range display and did not feel what she had expected to feel, which was relief. What she felt instead was the specific weight of 17 ships and the people who had crewed them, and she understood that this weight was not temporary, that it would not diminish with time in the way that ordinary grief diminished, because it was not grief exactly. It was knowledge. The knowledge of what things cost, carried permanently, the way a bone healed from a fracture carries the memory of the break in its structure forever. She drafted the casualty notifications herself, all 349 of them. It took her 2 days. Crane brought her coffee at regular intervals and did not comment on the fact that she never left the office. On the third day, a transmission arrived from the Sovereign Wrath, already beyond the heliopause, its drive signature fading toward the outer dark. "Colonel Calloway, I have reviewed the engagement records 17 times. I have watched the approach vector of the last signal in particular. I want you to know that I understand what was done and why, and what it cost the people who did it. I have not sent a message like this in 260 years. I am sending it because I believe you have earned the honesty it requires. What your species did in this engagement is not something I have a word for in any of the 19 languages I speak. I am recommending to my court that humanity be reclassified, not as a target, not as a resource, as a variable. We will not return. But I think you should know, in 43 engagements, not one civilization fought the way yours did today. I have been asking myself since the engagement ended whether that means I misjudged them all, or whether your species is genuinely different. I do not have an answer. I suspect I will be asking the question for some time." Zyrax. Calloway read it twice. Then she set it down and looked out the viewport at the debris field, still turning slowly in the dark, catching the light of a sun that didn't know any of this had happened. "He's going to study us," Crane said from the doorway. She hadn't heard him come in. "Yes. And next time he'll have answers to the approach." "Probably." She didn't look away from the window. "So we'll have to do something different." "We're good at that," Crane said. "We are." She was quiet for a moment. "That's the only reason any of this worked. Not because we were brave or because the plan was brilliant. Because when there was no good option left, we found a way to make the bad option work well enough." She finally turned from the window. "That's not heroism. It's just what we do." She sent her reply to Zyrax that afternoon. She spent 3 hours writing it. "Emperor Zyrax, we did not fight the way we fought today because we are exceptional. We fought that way because we had no alternative, and because when humans are left with no alternative, we become creative. The 349 people we lost were not heroes in any simple sense of the word. They were professionals who understood a problem clearly and chose to be part of the solution anyway. That is the only kind of heroism that has ever mattered. I hope your court draws whatever conclusions are useful to them, and I hope that if you do return, not you perhaps, but whoever comes after you in 200 years, they come prepared for the possibility that we will have found something new to surprise them with. We usually do." Colonel Mara Calloway, UEF Helios Array. She sent it and did not wait for a response. There would not be one, she thought. Or if there was, it would come in a form she wouldn't recognize until long after the fact. A change in Velthari policy, a new classification in some document she would never read, the slow adjustment of an empire's assumptions about a species it had almost dissolved for entertainment. The war was over. The work of understanding what it had cost was just beginning. Calloway walked back to the viewport one last time as the last light from the Sovereign Wrath's drive signature faded completely from the long-range sensors. The debris field caught the morning light, fragments of both fleets, spinning slowly, going nowhere, reflecting a sun that asked nothing of them. 349 names. She knew all of them. She would carry them the way you carry things that have nowhere else to go. Not as a burden exactly, but as a kind of permanent ballast, the weight that keeps you level when everything else is pulling sideways. The 30-day war for Earth ended not with a treaty, but with a question. An emperor who had ruled unchallenged for 260 years, asking for the first time in his reign what someone else wanted. It wasn't victory in any clean sense, but it was something the 43 civilizations before them had never achieved. It was being taken seriously.